he has focused mostly on epistemological aspects of linguistics and of semiotic theories. He also has many books, and I will also name my favorite ones. He has one on Hjelmslev. He also has some books on Saussure, La langue et sa représentation, and a book on Épistémologie semiotique, also about Hjelmslev. He has also one book about Magritte, wonderful. And yeah, he edited a collection of essays, Les discours de la linguistique. And well, he has been all around the world, and now he's here at Olomouc with us. So we couldn't be happier also. And now I will leave the floor to Professor Badir. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you. My job is not an easy task. Huh? We've just heard a wonderful lecture from Professor John Joseph. And now, with my poor English, it's my turn. So, anyway, I'm glad to be here in Olomouc. I have to say that I had the opportunity this morning and yesterday to visit the city, and I really enjoyed it. It's a lively city with all the numerous presence of international students and teachers, and well, deep historical roots. So I can recommend that the future speakers of Seimosalong come in presence here in Olomouc, and well, it's well worth the effort. And okay, so also I'm delighted to meet my semioticians colleagues here, Ludmila Lakova, Professor Tyler Barrett, and my dear Professor Israel Chavez. Many thanks for your warm welcome. Okay, now I would like to begin reading my presentation. It is well known that semiology was inaugurated by the linguist Ferdinand de Saussure, and that this inauguration, at least in part, also applies to semiotics. Here is the passage devoted to semiology in the course of general linguistics. I quote, "Language is a system of signs that express ideas and is therefore comparable to a system of writing, the alphabet of the deaf mutes, symbolic rites, polite formulas, military signals, etc. But it's the most important of all these systems. A science that studies the life of signs within society is conceivable. It would be a part of social psychology and consequently of general psychology. I shall call, it's still Saussure speaking, I shall call it semiology, from the Greek semeion, sign. Semiology would show what constitutes signs, what laws govern them." End of quotes. To write this passage, editors Charles Bailly and Albert Séchet compiled a series of concordant remarks elaborated during both the second course and the third. The first course, from 1907-1908, makes no allusion to semiology. There is no doubt, however, that Saussure's thoughts on the subject largely predate the course, since one of his colleagues in Geneva, the philosopher of science Adrien Neville, had taken Saussure's idea of semiology as a science of signs into consideration and mentioned it as part of sociology in his Nouvelle Classification des Sciences, second edition, published in 1901. The discovery of a manuscript, probably dating from 1891, La double essence du langage, double essence of language, confirms the presence of an early thought process by offering numerous occurrences of the term in a meaning similar to that of the course. Saussurean semiology, by which I mean semiology in Saussure's thoughts, process, and discourse, is therefore not a hapax legomenon. It's a discursive act of naming and defining that has a history. These dating details also prevent us from taking at face value, as is sometimes alleged, the supposed precedence of Peirce, whose manuscripts also date from the end of the 19th century, over the idea of a semiotic science. Not that this in itself is of any importance, but precisely it's a question of taking the measure of the acts of discourse by which, according to the tendency to be promoted, the history of semiotic inauguration is written. In truth, this history can only be the history of a multiple reception, an ongoing and collective intermingling of discourses that have contributed more or less to writing the history of semiotics. Indeed, one of the particularities of semiotics lies in the fact that its inaugural enactment is inscribed in a nonlinear history. This enactment has been rediscovered at various periods of reception, and its date has moved backwards accordingly. Before Saussure and Peirce, Locke, Condillac, and Temerus Apco, Aristotle are mentioned as first semioticians. Let's return to the course in general linguistics. What is the reason for the inauguration of semiology in this work? To three things, in my opinion, which deserve to be distinguished because they are not always linked to each other. One, a name. Two, a partial gnoseology. And three, an epistemic project. I will now explain these three things. First, the name. Conceiving a new science and at the same time giving it a name, this is the elementary syntax of a discursive articulation put forward for the inauguration of semiology. Knowledge is posited here as a strictly intellectual reality. Like any concept, its existence depends on a definition and a name. For an epistemic practice that would claim it, this is a sure guarantee. It would be paradoxical, however, given the course vigorous rejection of a few paragraphs later of the nomenclaturistic conception of language ascribed to psychologists and philosophers, if Saussure were aiming to create a new science through a purely nominative adjudication. The manuscript sources of the course show a development of thought more in harmony with the general theoretical lines. On the one hand, language is a set of signs. On the other hand, other institutions have this character. It follows that, and I'm still quoting, there must exist a science of signs broader than linguistics, namely semiology, a science necessitated by the existence of the object. As we can see, the reasoning follows the models of analogical proportion, which is the ordinary driving force behind linguistic creation. From three existing concepts, language, linguistics, science, the presence of a fourth, semiology, emerges by logical necessity. But epistemological questions then arise. What about the existence of the sign as an object? Is it an object analogous to language, albeit with a wider extension? And whatever the answer, affirmative or negative to the first question, what is the result of the connection induced by the analogical proportion between language and sign? on what basis can this relationship be interpreted? The analogical proportion in its general procedure leaves such question open. Neither the analogy nor the basis of the relationship between the two prime terms is predetermined. To take Saussure's examples, between pension and réaction, there is indeed a similarity independent of the analogical proportion, but this is only established on a formal basis. It is the ion ending that makes it possible to produce from pension, pensionnaire, the pair, réaction, réactionnaire. In contrast, it's another example from Saussure. Between prison and magasin, shop, stores, the analogy is not apparent, and it's only on the basis of analogical proportion that a relationship, this time of a semantic nature, is established between them. Both prison and magasin, prison and shop, represent places to which human beings can be assigned. As for the reasoning that gives rise to sémiologie, Saussure's analogy between language and sign does indeed precede proportion, albeit imperfectly, since language, langue in Saussure text, is analogous to a set of signs and not to sign. As for the basis for qualifying the analogy, it is obviously not formal, no resemblance between the signifiers langue and signe, but it would be problematic to argue outright that it is semantic, since it is precisely the insight gained from the concept of the sign that will enable Saussure to define the nature of language. In view of the sources, it is more plausible that this basis is referential. There are semiological facts in society, such as maritime signals, systems for the deaf and dumb, writings for the blind. So, as we can see, these questions are far from negligible. A whole section of the critical reception of the course, the most theoretical part, would need to be addressed. Such questions arise from the very creation of the word semiology, on the model of the relationship established between language and linguistics, and that's all I wanted to point out. The discursive gesture for conceptual naming, especially when the concept relates to a new science, already requires a theory of language to justify itself and brings with it epistemological questions that are decisive for the constitution of the object to be grasped. To relate semiology not only to the sign, but also to linguistics and language is to conform in a narrow and constraining way a system in which its denotative meaning is taken. Apart from this, the connotative effects of the chosen morphological expressions, semio and logie, can be considered minor. Let's take them into consideration all the same. The linguist will have carefully matched a root and a suffix derived from etymons both belonging to ancient Greek. The scholarly character is more assured than of its competitor, the word semiotique, which is a Greco-Latin hybrid. A science must be scholarly in character, and the use of etymology is an indication of this. A destiny is announced by the very choice of a word, with the risk, however, of an equivocation, since there already existed, much earlier, a science so designated, semiologie or semiology, relating to the medical field according to the 1752 edition of Trevoux Dictionary. This risk can also be seen as a kind of destiny. The general public will never know exactly what semiology is, as if by blurring the lines, the intention is to make it easier to bring the social sciences and humanities closer together with the sciences. Point 2, classification. The most apparent effect of the inauguration of semiology lies elsewhere. It consists in a gnoseological act. Linguists comes under semiology as one of its components, so that the laws discovered by semiology will be applicable to linguistics. This lesson from the course deserves to be re-examined in the light of its source, which make things a little more ambiguous and pave the way for the reversal proposed by Barthes in the introduction to Système de la Mode, according to which it is semiology that is to become one of the parts of linguistics. According to Ritlinger's notebooks, Saussure foresaw that linguistics would be the general patron of semiology, which cast doubt on the possibility that semiology would provide linguistics with laws that the latter would simply have to apply. However, the professor immediately brushes aside this doubt. I quote again the manuscripts, but it will be by chance. Theoretically, linguistics would only be a special case. To paraphrase, such a doubt can be dismissed because the problem raised is of a gnoseological nature, theoretically. It is here considered independently of questions of method and epistemic practice. Arguing the relationship between semiology and linguistics on the basis of a problem of method, as Barthes did, requires a shift that purely and simply erases rather than reverses Saussure's inaugural gesture, something that is only reasonably be considered if semiology already exists long enough to be distinguished from linguistics, which needs to be the case in 1967. So we need to get the problem right. The problem that confronted Saussure is announced by the opening title of the section of the course devoted to consideration on semiology, Places of Language in Human Facts. The basis for the classification of disciplines is thus clearly established. It lies in the objects of these disciplines, as they fit into one another according to their greater or lesser degree of particularity. The classifications thus reveals a hierarchy. The two extremes of the hierarchy are given in the section headings. At the top of the hierarchy, it's very difficult to say for me, meaning at the highest level of generality are considered human facts, while at the lowest, most specific level is language. What lies between the two? The question arises, and it's a problematic one, since several options were put forward during the 19th century to answer it. Saussure's final answer strictly adheres to the hierarchical principle of classification. Linguistics would be a part of semiotics, which would be a part of social psychology, which is a part of general psychology. But such an answer doesn't reveal the problems that gave rise to it. What is the value in the course of this insistence? I quote, "If I have succeeded in assigning linguistics a place among the sciences," with the answer that directly follows, "it is because I have related it to semiology." What is the gnoseological necessity behind the creation of semiology? The closing paragraph of chapter 3, devoted to the object of linguistics, offer an explanation. Language is a legitimate subject for social study, and in other respects, a subject for psychology, but neither is able to account for the object of linguistics. Psychology misses it completely, as it only reaches individual speech, and social study, by attaching language to the class of institutions, misses its distinguishing character. That's why it would be appropriate to call on a science of semiology, even if it means creating one, to grab this distinguishing character. That's the lesson of the course. But it should be noted that such an argument is not entirely satisfactory. Why should not it be up to linguistics to grasp the essential character of language? What need is there for semiotic? The existence of other science systems does not seem like a good enough reason. Just because language shares its essential character with older objects does not mean that linguistics is not capable of revealing it. Saussure concedes this without difficulty. I quote, "In short, the character that distinguishes semiological systems from all other institutions shows up clearly only in language, where it manifests itself in the things which are studied least, and the necessity of specific value of semiological science is therefore not clearly recognized. It is clear, moreover, that the course alleges a semiological character without having to push the development of semiology beyond that falls within the scope of general linguistics. And yet, just afterward, the semiological nature of the problem is reaffirmed. I quote, "But to me, the language problem is mainly semiological." Obviously, the editors of the course sought to attest to the presence of an internal debate, which is indeed present in the manuscript, but they failed to give a proper account of it. It is true that Saussure does not make clear what is at stake, which requires a little epistemological reconstruction that I would now like to present. This issue is in fact a theoretical debate among linguists. For Saussure, granting language its rightful place in human facts was a means of countering the ideas of his predecessors, who tended to adopt not only method from other science for the study of language facts, but also the types of objects that one would expect from such method. The neo-grammarians formulated phonetic laws in according with treatises on physiology. Before them, comparatists studied languages like naturalists studied species and anatomists studied bones. And Whitney claimed the authority of sociology for linguistics. So Saussure's discursive gesture consists in admitting the principle of gnosiological classification while rejecting hypotheses based on existing sciences. Since linguists have adopted various gnosiological theses, it is not linguistics as a whole that could found an order of reality of its own, but only a linguistics that takes language as its object and is capable of recognizing its own objectivity. And this is the role of semiology. For Saussure, semiology has no other mission than to identify language's own form of objectivity. It fulfills this role simply through the name by which designates this form, objectivity, the semiological character of language, but also through the need to found a new science. So, despite the rather limited role it is given, semiology is underpinned by a strong epistemological thesis. The objectivity it establishes must be based on scientific grounds. There is therefore an epistemic project behind semiology, but not for the simple sake of discovering new facts. This project consists in elaborating the form of objectivity necessary to recognize the place of language among human facts. Before turning to the epistemic project of semiology, I'm going to present a synthesis of the partial gnosiology generated by the recognition of the true place of language among human facts. Even if semiology does outline this place, it does not solve all the classification problems that arise from linguistics. As we have seen, Saussure sought to settle, albeit conditionally, the relationship between sociology and psychology by placing semiology and with it linguistics, under the umbrella of a social psychology, ultimately dependent on general psychology. However, Adrien Naville, for his part, had placed semiology under the strict dependence of sociology, and manuscript sources show Saussure to be less assertive than in the course on the subject of gnosiological classification. Individual versus society, psychic versus physical. These conceptual oppositions inform linguists' theoretical debates about their objects of study and the appropriate method for approaching it. Although language is social in its essence, it's Saussure's words, Saussure considers that its study needs to be solely psychic. What a paradox. Saussure was well aware of this, as he hoped that in return for the subordination of linguistics to general psychology, psychologists would realize, I quote, that language is not one of their branches, but the ABC of their own activity. So, the place of language among human facts is not just a matter for linguists. It also calls into question the principle of unity of the human sciences. Point 3. What then is the program of knowledge than the course assigned to semiology? It is all contained in the aforementioned PTA formula. Semiology would show what constitutes science, what laws govern them. The first 2 chapters of part 1, general principles, take up these 2 very distinct tasks in this order, applying them to the linguistic sign. 1, nature of the linguistic sign. 2, immutability and mutability of the sign. The program of semiology announces the plan of general linguistics and does not deviate from it. It would be wrong then to think that Saussure's program is based solely on the power of the imagination. His general linguistics undertakes the realization of the program of semiology, confining it, according to the needs of the exposition, to the case of the linguistic sign. These pages from the course on the theory of the sign are too well known and commented on for me to dwell on them. Indeed, it is not so much the theoretical directions that interest me as the epistemic principles they obey. It is clear that, however new it may be and however open to discovery, semiology is based on an existing model of knowledge, such as the one that prevailed at the beginning of the 20th century. In other words, Saussure may have consciously sought to put forward new ideas for the epistemology of linguistics, notably through the project of semiology and the integration of linguistics as part of this new science. And posterity has shown how considerable these ideas are. Saussure did not, however, claim to have made original proposals relating to general epistemology and the theory of science. And even if they were original, it would require a different evaluation that carried out in the history of linguistics, ideas, and the genealogical accounts of semiotics. 2 general criteria are worth highlighting. Semiology, 1, semiology is an empirical science. 2, semiology is a descriptive science. Such criteria are so common in the ordinary practices of science that these watchwords have become deeply embedded in the researcher's habitus and have become indistinguishable from one another. However, this has not always been the case. I want to show that. Saussure's insistence on the presence of facts in both linguistics and semiology is an indication that scholarly descriptions were not always empirical. In the scholarly collections that made up the bulk of 19th century libraries, philologists, grammarians, and language historians assembled data in syntheses that still owed much to the rationalist traditions of language study. Empiricism, on the other hand, dictates the organization of data should follow a strictly inductive order. This is because the data has been made on a framework of rationality of its own, either in a strictly immanent way or through the action of a giving intelligence. And in this respect, the fact is supported as much by generality, the linguistic fact had to be a general reality, as by particularity. Saussure's use of the term law must also be understood in this sense. The laws governing science and linguistic science in particular are certainly not deduced from the a priori rational action of the scientists, but neither are they reduced to mere general characteristics from which the scientist can present his object of study. These laws are imperative, both for the facts and for the scientists who wishes to give an empirical account of these facts. The fundamental character attributed by Saussure to linguistic science need to be interpreted as a legislative act. Indeed, if these signs are said to be arbitrary, it is not in terms of any of the ordinary interpretations of this word, conventionality or non-necessity, but rather because they impose themselves on speakers. There is, however, some work that is due to the empirical scientists. Facts, even when governed by laws, are given in profusion and complexity. It is therefore necessary to discover laws based on an analysis of specific facts. This work is fundamentally an act of sorting based on deductive reasoning. Reality, in order to be known according to its laws, needs to be sectioned and broken down. This is a work involving description, and it is by no means certain that all empirical knowledge will succeed at first attempt. Auguste Comte's efforts in positive philosophy consisted in particular in arriving at a hierarchical breakdown that would give social psychology a place in the description of the facts of knowledge. Admittedly, the empiricism of this social study was not in question. It had both supporters and detractors, but before Comte, it was not known where or how to situate the laws that this study revealed. There can be no doubt that Saussure projects for semiology is marked by the seal of positivism. Indeed, Saussure was influenced early on by the Kantian doctrines, which was strongly endorsed among the linguists of the Parisian circle. And it is the doctrine that served either directly or indirectly through a disciple like Émile Littré as the backdrop to his epistemological thoughts. As we have seen, the creation of semiology was intended to revise the classification of linguistics among the sciences, meaning to recognize the true laws governing the facts studied by linguists. Clearly, in this perspective, semiology itself would be conducted according to this descriptive principle. The referential basis on which it is presented fits into the general framework of an analytical description of social reality. If semiology has to study systems of sign, its task begins with the delimitation of each of these systems and continues with something that concerns linguistic science, namely that of characterizing by comparison and differentiation the laws governing these systems. For linguistics only includes itself in this general science in order to derive from it that which individualizes its object. Last but not least, semiology directly concerns the epistemology of linguistics by establishing hierarchical relationship between science systems, insofar as some of these derived systems presuppose the existence of the former. This is the case of alphabetic writing, which cannot therefore be the object of linguistics, nor can it participate in the facts that are its own. Semiology thus perfectly fulfills the positivist contract of an empirical and descriptive science. Its aim is to create a theory of science whose models are forged with a view to reproducing operations that are both real and articulated. Real in this sense that they are given as observable facts, articulated in the sense they are grasped as describable objects. I had a section presenting proposing a counterpoint with the Peirce's project for semiotics. I wish to I wish to show that the project of Peirce is neither empirical nor descriptive. It's on the contrary nomothetic, meaning it brings laws from a rational deduction. So it's nomothetic, and it's also normative, so in opposition to descriptive. So it doesn't say what signs are, but what signs must be. But I skip it, and so back to Saussure. So and now I want to show that semiology is a deceptive project, because there is a strong doubt that that it would be possible of conducting semiological research within an empirical framework. In order to explain this fundamental difficulty, we first need to clarify the nature of the articulation between two aspects of the task assigned by Saussure to semiology in its relationship to linguistic. I already present the first one, but I summarize. According to the first of these aspects, the semiological project depends on the existing framework. More precisely, it is because it is based on a pre-existing gnosiological and epistemological framework that it can bring about a shift in the organization of knowledge to the benefit of linguistics. Such a framework, as has just been confirmed, is broadly, it's broadly that of positivism. It is assumed a hierarchical and homogeneous coordination of scientific disciplines, as well as an apparatus of epistemic principles valid for a large body of science, whatever their subject matter. By contrast, the second aspect of semiotics' role in the epistemological characterization of linguistics radically challenges the existing framework. The notion on which the theories of the positive sciences are based are systematically destabilized. The facts of language are not given. The object of linguistics is not independent of the point of view that focuses on it. The unity of this object remains untraceable. The entities of language are abstract, albeit real. The categories of language are negative. In short, everywhere, difference and negativity reign in place of the positive identities cherished by the empirical and descriptive sciences. From a neo-grammarian's perspective, the sense of utter disappointment cannot be overstated. If we were to give credence to Saussurean thoughts, the linguist would be expected to do anything other than what with his declared epistemic principles lead him to believe and say he does. It is up to semiology to reveal the singularity inherent in the epistemic practice of linguists. Their object is semiological, and it is because of this quality that the notions ordinarily employed in the positive sciences lose all intelligibility when applied to this practice. Semiology thus serves as both medicine and poison for linguistics. It enhances the position of linguistics within other scientific disciplines, but at the same time undermines the foundations that would enable it to hold that position. While the course in general linguistics plays down the deceptive nature of Saussurean thought, despite the devastation it wreaks on certainties, the manuscript reveals its full impetuosity. The theme of the Saussurean rupture, conceived with a view to founding a modern science for linguistics, is now replaced by that of questioning, skepticism, and perplexity. It remains to consider the problem from the point of view of the semiological project itself. Indeed, how could the destructive and deeply disconcerting effect of semiology on linguistics not rub off on the disciplinary project of semiotics? Three new hypotheses emerge regarding the status of semiology. I explained them in the likely order of their epistemological unveiling without seeking to develop them further or make them more probable than their formulation suggests. In the first place, it is with great difficulty that semiology could be an empirical descriptive science. Grammarians were able to believe in an empirical donation of language facts because they confused this donation with the feeling of the speakers, which they themselves are, according to which these facts come into existence. For semiology, the situation is far less encouraging. The donation of semiological facts cannot be supported by the feelings of users. What would they be? Signs from no isolated reality prior to the point of view that constitutes them as object of knowledge. And this very point of view would not suffice to make them describable. In fact, Saussure had foreshadowed the near impossibility of a semiological description. I quote a note from the manuscript of Saussure. Semiology equal morphology, grammar, syntax, synonymy, rhetoric, stilistics, lexicology, etc., all inseparable. End of quote. If the whole is inseparable, then it is unlikely that a scientific project, which presupposes at the very least analysis and sorting, can be built that corresponds to the description of an object constituted as semiological. Secondly, with Saussure, it became clear that semiology could develop a theory to elucidate the epistemic principle of linguistic studies, as well as elements of methodology to explain the practice of linguists. This is the role of general linguistics that Saussurean semiology plays when it takes language as its object. Yet, it is conceivable that semiology could play such a role for disciplines other than linguistics and for objects other than language. As researchers have demonstrated with the discovery of manuscripts, Saussure, long before he had to teach general linguistics at the University of Geneva, had hypothesized that the myth recounted in Germanic legends are semiological objects. However, it has to be admitted that folklorists have not waited for such hypothesis before seizing up these legends and studying them in a scholarly manner. In such a case, what would semiology's task be, if not to show, as it does for linguistics, on the basis of existing studies, the nature of mythical signs and the laws that govern them? In this second hypothesis, semiology would play the role of a critical theory with regard to descriptive studies, just as epistemology does for the exact sciences, or as philosophy does for knowledge in general. Finally, third hypothesis, it appears that semiology is a project without a disciplinary framework. This third hypothesis is a consequence of the first two. On the one hand, it cannot assume the destiny of a positive scientific discipline. On the other, the critical function it is capable of fulfilling vis-à-vis other disciplines dictates that its fields of action should not be delimited a priori. So this brief conclusion, this investigation of various Saussurean writings shows that the inaugural gesture of semiology was both strong and ambiguous. Its assertive character stems from the fact that it contains a gnosiological intervention, as well as the demonstration of its epistemic powers and stakes in the perspective on an already instituted discipline, linguistics. The status of this enactment remains no less equivocal, since it begins by confusing rather than denying any possibility of integration into the epistemological framework in place at the time, but is not accompanied by any proposal for the replacement of this framework. On the contrary, it leaves the door open to several hypotheses without assuming any of them. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you a lot. And so, do we have any questions here or online? I think they are part. Okay. So maybe from Tartu, are there questions?
I'm listening.
If not,
hello, Tartu.
Not. I would have a question also, and I can also begin. Please. So Ludmila.
Thank you very much. This was a wonderful lecture, and I'm sorry you didn't go into Peirce because I would be very interested in your parts about Peirce and the contra arguments. So maybe if you can send it to me.
Sure.
Yeah. But yeah, I really liked the question that you asked at the beginning of your talk, whether we really need semiology and why cannot linguistics simply answer all these questions about the fundamental nature of language and what it shares with other science systems. And it reminded me that I met a colleague from University of Oslo in Norway some years ago. And she's a great syntactician in the Chomskyan way. And I recently, I was listening to a podcast, and it was an interview with her. So after many years that I have spoken to her, I was listening to this podcast, and she was asked what she's currently into. And she said, I have this project, and it's about a new field, which is called superlinguistics.
Superlinguistics. Mm-hmm.
And indeed, so apparently some people are still convinced that linguistics can deal with all these questions that normally semiology or semiotics is dealing with. And so just that I can read this definition: superlinguistics is an emerging subfield of linguistics that applies formal linguistic methodology to objects of study beyond language, such as gestures, music, dance, and non-verbal pictorial representations. So that was just a comment. I think it's quite funny.
It is funny how the Chomskyan trends have denied the semiotics works and project, at least the semiotic project. So, but and still, yes, and but it is interesting also that it is because linguists and particularly Chomskyan can be very je sais même pas ce que je veux dire en français. Can be very attached. Can be very attached to the facts, and yet, and yes, and for what are the corpora, what are your methods of descriptions, and you need to have a method, very empirical one, and so on. And yet there are also temptation to enlarge linguistics with unknown horizon, to unknown horizon. So yeah, linguistics is still an ambiguous enterprise. Whatever linguist can say can officially in official manner. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, either here or from our friends online?
Professor Joseph.
Ah, yes, please.
Sémir, I was very intrigued and taken with what you said about semiology not there being, I think you said semiology could not be an empirical undertaking. And did you mean that specifically in context of Saussure? I mean, Saussure didn't see it as an empirical undertaking, but do you mean, you seem to be saying that generally that couldn't be so, and that surprises me. But what you've just said about Chomskyians being empirical surprises me too, because in my view, they're not really empirical. You know? But anyway, can you elaborate on why semiology could not be an empirical undertaking?
Just because there are no evidence of in the English sense of proof. There's no evidence of semiological facts, actually. So how semiology could be an empirical science if there are no empirical facts to study, to observe and study and analyze? This is my point, and because even for linguists, the empirical status of linguistic facts is still fragile. And for semiotic, it's worse. For semiotic, it's worse. Semiological facts that cannot be obvious, evident. So I didn't say that for Saussure, semiology was not an empirical science. On the contrary, because if you agree with me that his epistemological framework was the positivism, well, a version of positivism, then of course semiology has to be an empirical science. But it encounters a major difficulty that semiological facts doesn't exist. Okay, so you could say that, of course, you could say that semiological facts in Saussure's minds is signals and alphabet and so on. Right. So I can admit this, but still, he didn't go much further.
No, because they're always subject to interpretation.
Right.
Yes. Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. To be constituted as an epistemic object, a scientific object. I prefer epistemic. It's broader than scientific, because scientific, but as an epistemic object, it must be interpreted.
Yeah. Do you any comments or questions? Because I also have some comments and a lot of questions. Because the discussion is great, and I was thinking that there are some kind of links between the two presentations, and precisely this problem of data and how it is constructed. Because you mentioned this notion of like le sentiment linguistique, like this the speaker's feeling, and yeah, that's why I was yeah, some of the commentaries that Tyler made to Joseph with this focus on the fact that signifiers are not substantial but formal, and yeah, the fact that well, because on the background I was thinking on another German Dilthey, and this distinction between sciences of men and sciences of nature, and whether or not, or what would be the difference, because and I think the problem here is what is given already and what is built, because there are many attempts to distinguish between sciences by means of exactly in the way Saussure does. So sciences where the object is there, and sciences where the point of view creates the object, or because there are for some people these later sciences are sciences that study ways of knowing the world. So semiological facts would, in a way, not much be facts, but rather like this structure that enables to know some things in some way. But then from this, of course, we go back to the problems that were put by Joseph's presentation. So yeah, I don't know if my intervention here is really a question or more like a comment that aims to fuel the discussion between you two. Yeah. Yes, because I guess we would find this problem also, with, of course, with Chomsky and with this more formal approach to language. Yeah, yeah. I don't know what do you think? Or...
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yes, I don't know if it's in connection with what John said, but apart from the linguistic feeling, which cannot, and with that we cannot attain signifier. That's for sure. Yes, there are structure that we can present as a descriptive object, I mean, formal descriptors. But as I told him, as I said in my talk, these structure, these as descriptors implied, presuppose a non-structural description.
Right. Yeah.
That's impossible to describe a reality as a structure directly. First, you need to have a comprehensive grasping of this, that it is not structural. But I'm not sure that John would be agree with that.
I do agree, and it makes me wonder whether all of that is not, you know, when I showed the Oxford English Dictionary second definition of fascism as being, you know, any attempt to enforce conformity, Are we doing that every time we identify a signifier? Maybe we are.
Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank all
Seems
of
like
you.
he was more, Joseph, John, it seemed like maybe by questioning this non-empirical status of semiology, perhaps maybe you were trying more to poke at this, the honorific of the sciences itself, the title of the sciences, particularly the natural sciences as an honorific, scientific, yeah. And maybe your point something more like, well, why not? You know, why can't semiology be given the same honorific as the rest of the natural sciences? Perhaps you don't believe so much in this distinction. It seemed to me that Sémir was alluding to the same.
Well, I was, no, Sémir was going farther than I would have done previously, although what he said now makes me rethink what I've always taken for granted about semiology being a science and being empirical. I mean, I would have thought that, you know, the fact that you're wearing a certain color shirt is a semiotic fact. But no, I make it a semiotic fact by imposing something that turns it into a signifier. And I don't know whether all sciences do that. I suspect they do. But it's not a question I thought about previously. And I think it does indeed bring our two talks together in a way I hadn't foreseen might happen.
Great, great. So, do we have any more commentaries or questions? So, if not, we can indeed thank our presenter once more. Continue the party here, and hopefully you all at home will also continue partying a little bit this Thursday night. And we will see you in.
That's my privilege. I will participate to the party now.
Yes, yes.
I have to go feed the cat. Sorry.
Yeah, and next time we will have other two presenters. We'll have Professor Claire Forel and Professor Rosana D'Angelis. It will be all online, but of course we will meet here, and I mean here online and also here in person. And yes, so see you in 2 weeks. This will be, well, yeah, 2 weeks from now. I think it's November 9th. So yeah, and yeah, stay in touch. Follow us on Facebook and so on. And yeah, thank you.